pro-Israel, let me say.
Wonderful. We earlier asked Dr. Mahathir Mohd about the sanctions policies as pursued unilaterally by the United States and allies, and that they are proving to fail to resolve international crises and are basically proving to be counterproductive. And this is what he had to say.
Well, sanctions has proven a failure in terms of changing the attitudes of government. But it has, of course, succeeded in doing a lot of damage, in killing a lot of people. At the moment, I don't see any substitutes beyond greater and more aggressive action. For example, in the case of Iraq, sanctions did not succeed in removing or curbing the activities of the Iraqi government of Saddam Hussein. So they had to resort to actual invasion. So the only alternative to sanction is actually military invasion.
Richard Wise, what has the United States foreign policy of sanctions, blockades, and embargoes achieved vis-a-vis Iran? After all, the country has been under sanctions for over 3 decades.
Well, just to what the Prime Minister said in his letter, that holds true for the Iraq sanctions, but people learned a lot from that whole experience, and now the sanctions are much more targeted. They're smart sanctions. With respect to Iran, the sanctions have succeeded in changing some countries' behavior. The one I'm perhaps more familiar with is China. During the 1980s, 1990s, China was much more easier to export dual-use items. And just to remind your viewers that those are items that can be used for military purposes or for civilian purposes, something like a computer. But the sanctions adopted by the U.S. on Chinese firms after Chinese protests against it, it did lead to a change in policy. And that's been true, I think, in other areas as well. I know it's been difficult to generate. Some foreign companies have become reluctant to invest in Iran because of the risk premium because of these sanctions. But certainly, we're not going to try something that's what happened in Iraq. I agree that if that's what he meant by his letter, it was a mistake. But that was something a long time ago. It's not currently the way we use sanctions.
Okay, and Didrik Mohammed?
Yeah, well, except we still are using sanctions against Cuba, which I think are failed. I also believe, they are successful in the sense that they are creating hardship for the people of Cuba, but they've clearly been unsuccessful in regime change. And I think that's the problem. Like, putting forth sanctions in order to impose U.S. will on sovereign nations, no, like that should not be the starting place of sanctions. I'm not adamantly against all sanctions, but I believe sanctions aimed at regime change really shouldn't be the place of the United States. And I do hope that President Barack Obama will follow his word and will move beyond this idea that we won't talk to those who won't listen to us and we're going to economically blockade those who won't do our bidding, but will rather enter into dialogues with sovereign countries as sovereign countries and try to develop understanding instead of imposing our will on them.
All right, and finally, we asked Dr. Mahathir Mohd what he thinks about democracy and whether or not this concept can be thrust upon a nation from abroad or it has to come from within. And this is what he had to say.
Well, systems of government have changed from time to time, starting with absolute monarchs until it become belief in republics and more power to the people. And from there, the power of the people became organized into giving the people the right to change government through voting, not through civil war, but through voting. So that is the basis of democracy. But over time, they have added more things to democracy. And they would regard people who do not practice all these new things about democracy as not being democratic. Whereas democracy basically is based on the right of the people to change government without violence, merely through the use of votes. However, democracy doesn't always work. With some countries, whenever a new government is chosen, the minority feel unhappy about it, and they will create problems like having strikes or even violent action. In the case of America and Europe, while they preach democracy for themselves, they want to promote democracy in other countries. But for them, it is only democratic if you choose governments which are chosen by them. That is why in Algeria and in Palestine, when the people who were elected were not in their favor, they refused to accept democracy. So it is just hypocrisy.
And Richard, very briefly, your final comments in 10 seconds, please.
Hard to say because he was vague, but it's not. I'm sure democracy promotion will be a key thrust of the Obama administration, though not the way the Bush administration has done it.
Thank you. And Dedrick Mohammed?
Yeah, promoting democracy would be a radical change for the United States because the United States has a history of supporting governments that do our bidding. But if a person like Aristide's elected of Haiti or Chavez is elected in Venezuela, we don't have a problem supporting the overthrow of these governments, and we have no problem giving billions of dollars of military aid to absolute dictatorships like Egypt and Saudi Arabia.
Okay, gentlemen, we have to leave it just here. We're just out of time. This marks the finale. Thank you, Dedrick Mohammed. A big thank you to the panel for appearing as guests and to you for sticking around and watching us. For more information, go to our website. And if you have anything to tell us, you can use the email address. It's on your screens. But this show, Four Corners, will definitely return. And until then, it's goodbye from me, Jubin Zarvan.